By now, you've developed a pretty solid sense of the conflict and structural perspectives on social inequality, as well as the ideological underpinnings used to justify stratification by socioeconomic status. Now we're going to focus in on the changing economic structure that has allowed for a reemergence of the concentration of wealth in the hands of a tiny minority of the population, something not seen since the Gilded Age came to an end in the early 1900s. This concentration of wealth is especially apparent in the United States, but we'll also do some international comparisons to see how we measure up. Today, there is a growing concern that, as during the Gilded Age, the economic structure of our society no longer allows people to be able to achieve economic success through their own ability to work hard and set aside money for the future. In other words, is it even possible in today's world to realize the American dream? Of course, it's fair to ask if there ever was a time when it was possible to achieve the American dream, and the answer largely depends on who we're talking about and when we're talking about. But there's a growing sense that achieving the American dream is less and less likely for larger and larger segments of the US population. Before we examine what's going on here in detail, I just wanted to give you a couple of important introductory points to remember. The first is to be wary of economic determinism regarding inequalities of wealth and income. In other words, economic conditions are not completely predetermined. Income and wealth distribution cannot be reduced to purely economic mechanisms. This also means that economic realities aren't always predictable. For example, the significant reduction in inequality that occurred in most developed countries between 1910 and 1950 were a result of two world wars which weren't predictable, the Great Depression, and the policies adopted to cope with these major shocks to the economic system. Likewise, the resurgence of inequality that gained momentum starting in the 1980s is largely due to significant political shifts and a resulting change in social policy, particularly with regard to taxation and finance. The second important point to keep in mind, one that I just hinted at, is that there are powerful mechanisms pushing in both directions, pushing us toward what is called economic convergence, which means a reduction of economic inequality, and toward economic divergence, which refers to the expansion of inequality. And if there are powerful mechanisms alternately pushing us in each direction, what this tells us is that there is nothing automatically built into the economic structure of our economy, nor the global economy, that prevents destabilizing inegalitarian forces from prevailing permanently. If we want to change the current resurgence of inequality and the growing concentration of wealth, then, barring another world war or another Great Depression, it is up to us, we the people, right, to fight for social policies intended to restrain the powerful forces toward economic divergence. But, of course, that depends on knowing what factors contribute to divergence in the first place, which is the primary goal with this topic. Another goal is to understand how it's possible to promote greater economic convergence, greater equality. If we understand the mechanisms behind growing economic inequality, then we will have a good idea of how to intervene and encourage greater economic equality. An important glimmer of hope to keep in mind as we learn about economic inequality is that we still have an underlying democratic system which places power in the hands of the people, so long as we are willing to exercise it on behalf of the interests of the people rather than on behalf of the elites, as we've been doing for the past several decades.